would just love to get your take on sort of the question of adoption and like from what you're doing, where do you see the challenges in adoption? Like where do you see the missteps or slowing down the process? Be a question.
I think that's kind of dependent upon from what perspective and lens it is that we're approaching this from, right? Because like everybody, like adoption means something different for every crowd. Like
Yeah.
adoption in the startup space, it can be, how am I going to get consumers to want to spend money on this? The other side of it could actually be, though, how am I going to get contractors buying into wanting to implement this into their business? Adjacent to that, it could be how am I going to build support tools that are going to enable contractors to be able to get their services out into the market. A level up from that is NGOs and them saying, how are we going to make this policy appeal to everybody in the market? And it's like there's kind of subcategories within all of that. So to me, the challenge when we're talking about adoption is first really getting dialed in on who we're trying to talk to and what it is that we want to accomplish with those individual crowds so that we can start working backwards from that answer. What I find probably the most consistently is that people are so locked into their own perspective and the problems that they're trying to solve that they haven't taken time to consider out what adoption looks like from the person that they're trying to get buy-in from. We have people who are out trying to sell heat pumps. Heat pump, heat pump, heat pump, you should get a heat pump. But they're not thinking about the client journey for it. And one of the challenges with that we see, particularly with a lot of the electrification brands, is they're following HVAC business models to sell bundled electrification solutions when a emergency replacement isn't the time to try to talk to a consumer about changing over their entire energy profile and addressing their whole home performance. So those are kind of some of the areas that I see
Yeah.
gaps.
So if you take the last point, which I totally agree with, it's funny. My neighbor, I just went out this morning walking my dogs, and their water heaters going right. So it's like, and I was thinking, I should talk to him about the heat pumps and some water heater, heat pump water heaters that I was just reading about. And I was like, it's probably not the time to look super stressed out. So like it's totally right. But how do you but how do you get ahead of it? How do you get ahead of it so that like people, how do you see that where contractors or others can talk about these things as people do transition, like to catch them, like where are they missing and where could they do better?
Are we talking about this from the standpoint of if I'm talking to a startup or if I'm talking to like policy or like, because I would say
Yeah.
there's slightly different conversations, but
Well, what would be the different? Why don't you give like high level the different conversations if you're talking to?
yeah, so if I'm talking to, let's say I'm talking to NGO policy group and they're trying to figure out how are we going to get buy-in on this policy? Well, one, you need multiple layers. There's multiple stakeholders to that, right? Because we need consumers to buy in, we need the people who are going to implement those solutions to buy in, and potentially maybe even need support services around that to enable the end worker to be able to do it. So at that point, we need to have a understanding of what's going on across the entire market, right? Like what are the driving factors for each of these individuals or each of these stakeholders to move them in that direction towards what the outcome that you want to have. And more importantly, that here's where I find that there's a challenge, and that is again, we kind of come in with our own baggage of what it is that we want to accomplish and how we want to go about doing that, and the thing that we need to get done. As an example, I've talked to some NGOs and they're like, we have messaging out for contractors and like we just feel like it's not resonating. We're not getting the traction with the messaging that we're looking for. And my feedback is it's because you don't really care about contractors, you care about heat pumps. They're like, they get some
Right.
defensiveness on that. And I'm like, well, no, it's okay. Like that's actually your metric. That's your KPI. Like if you're going to judge the success of this policy, it is how many heat pumps did we get out the door. So it's okay that that's your metric. The problem is that when you're going to go communicate this to the contractor, what they're hearing is none of the words that this person's using makes it sound like they actually care about my business. And so
Right.
that's why they're not paying attention, right? That's where that is. And in reality, you are actually trying to help them out because if they do better, you do more heat pumps. But the thing is that the alignment's off. And you're thinking you're helping contractors, but they're not hearing it that way. And in reality, the energy that you're putting into what you're doing isn't aligned to helping the core of their business, which would actually be the thing that helps them get to more heat pumps. So that's kind of, it's an interesting space because it's a lot of nuance that really goes into a lot of this, like really understanding like kind of the deeper psychology. I find myself telling people, you know, we're here to solve the problem behind the problem, right? You think the
Yeah.
problem's heat pumps. The problem's not heat pumps. The problem's the effectiveness of the contractors that are in the market that are responsible for selling the heat pumps. Make heat pumps their target. You watch out for improving their business.
Right. It's interesting. It sort of like goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like, so you have to, those contractors, they're waking up every morning and they're thinking about, the job they have to do, maybe doing a great job for their customers and, running their business. But there's assumptions made of like, hey, you should just change into pushing this. And then it is not about them and their lives. In the same way for consumers, I think too, it's not them and their lives. It's here's the thing you should be doing, where we have to, on a very basic level, talk to people about how their lives are, like how this would be beneficial to their life. And then there's all these other good things that are come out of it. But it's interesting.
You have to understand the problem from the standpoint, speak about the problem as though from the perspective of someone who sat in the chair, who has actually experienced it. And if you can articulate it that way, a lot of times and I found this out really early on in my career, the reasons that we thought that people were purchasing from us were like rarely the reasons that they were purchasing from us. Like my start in the clean energy space was with a startup, and we did home performance and weatherization and building efficiency. And so like our initial start, which is actually really interesting because this is back in 2011, here we are in 2024 and businesses that are going through similar experiences. But like our market theory when we jumped in was, hey, there's this new round of incentive funding that's available. We're going to be able to sell these upgrades to homeowners that naturally make sense. And we're going to be able to do it for a discount. It's going to be 30, 40% less because of these incentives. Of course, they're going to take advantage of it. And then, we go through in 6 months, we hardly sell anything. I think our average contract value is like $1,500. I think we're selling like somewhere between $4,000 and maybe $8,000, $10,000 max a week. Between all the reps, 6 months, we're like, oh my God, I think we might have really messed up here. And it wasn't really until around that 6 month, all of a sudden, like the messaging started to change and the realization of what we were really doing for the consumer started to shift. And we started to realize what their real problems were. Yeah, they were coming to us because they were hearing about incentives. I would love to take advantage of incentives, free money. All right, well, that's a horrible route to start with anybody, free, right? Because you're not great discount, sure. Value, yes. Free, no. Right? There's a big gap between there. But people would come because they're interested in incentives. Then they would come because they want to save some money, right? Or they would have an interest in have us come to their house because they want to save money. Okay, but now if you get stuck in this avenue, which is one of the challenges of energy efficiency, if you're doing it just strictly on money savings, all right, cool, see you in 20, 30-year payback. No one's going to get excited about that. No one's going to get really amped about saving $50 a month, but spending $10,000. Like that math's never going to math for them.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we got deeper into conversations, we realized, well, wait a second. People are coming because they're interested in saving money, right? If we sit down and actually have a conversation with the homeowner, though, thing is like you live in this house, right? You live in this building. Like, what's that like for you? Shoot, as we dive into that, we find out, hey, there's some comfort issues, right? Here's a big thing. You mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you ever talk to contractors, what is it that makes people buy? What's the number one thing? Comfort, 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 comfort.
Yeah.
Okay, you do realize comfort can never be the number one driver of a deal. Why? If you took a psychology 100 class, you saw Maslow hierarchy of needs. Do you see comfort at the base level of that? Or do you see safety and security?
Right.
So comfort is never going to be the number one driver. As a matter of fact, think about it. Human beings are evolutionarily designed to withstand discomfort. We're in the desert, we're in the mountains, we're in the water, wherever we can do high temperatures, low temperatures, and everything in between. The human body is physically designed. And so it always kind of makes me laugh when I hear these contractors are like, well, hey, we need to get prices down lower. We need to get prices down lower. I'm like, well, wait a second. They were uncomfortable. Why didn't they buy? That's the number one driver, right?
Yeah.
They're actually telling you with their lack of purchase I would rather be uncomfortable than pay the amount that you just gave me. So it obviously can't be the number one driver.
Right. Right.
And sure enough, that's what we found as we went through the market. It was like, all right, comfort. Yes, you can drive a higher percentage of deals over comfort than just energy savings. That is accurate. Why? I will pay extra for comfort. But it's not, but again, people will bypass that if it hits a certain amount. The next
Yeah.
layer down, safety and security. Once we start talking about health, mold and mildew concerns, once we start talking about the fear of unexpected expenses, what happens if your roof goes out on you? What happens if your HVAC system dies for you in the middle of peak season and now you're sitting here with no heat in the middle of winter? Like those are the things that ultimately ended up driving more sales. But that again is all back to the core aspect of what I'm talking about, and that is you have to speak from their perspective and their journey through this as the person sitting in the seat and experiencing and seeing the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, a couple of points on this. Like, so one, and I want to talk to you about your experience with AI, because I know that you've actually leveraged some of the tools today, and I have a question for you about that. But it's interesting thinking about how people change, because part of it is this story that gets told, right? So I'm like, we work a lot in like the story that gets told, how people tell their story to others. Are they connecting? Are they telling a story to themselves and wondering why it's not connecting? It's like, hey, this story sounds great to me, but then it doesn't connect when they get out there. And it's, I think, to the point you're making is like people aren't connecting to the human being. They're not connecting to like those core reasons why people make decisions or don't make decisions. And it's so important. It's the messaging and being able to get in. If there's insecurity, if there's fear, if people have fear of missing out, right? Like all the reasons why people make decisions. And I wanted to ask you, like, this is more just something I've been thinking about a lot. Is like in a transition to like a clean world, right? Is like on the one hand, we look at diabetes and the number of people that die from diabetes. Now, if you change your diet, that's a choice you can make today, and to safeguard your health. It's so, will people make that choice? So we can see that they don't actually make that choice on their own. A lot of times they won't do the right thing, human beings, unfortunately. um, but if we look at like smoking laws or seatbelt laws, we can see, like, I was reading in Seth Griffin's book, Sal Griffith's book, Electrify. He was saying, like, okay, in that in the book, he was saying, like, whatever it was, in the late 70s, 40% of Americans smoked cigarettes. Now it's like 15%, whatever, but it's way down, right? So why did people stop smoking cigarettes? Or seatbelts. When I was a kid in like the 70s, you never wore seatbelts. Like, you just roll around, you get thrown around in the car. There was no seatbelts going on. And you were actually like dopey if you were like wearing a seatbelt. Like it was kind of geeky to do that anyway. But everybody gets and puts a seatbelt on. So how does that happen? So those are things I think about in the transition of human behavior of, what are the other things that need to come together so that people are like, kind of guided in the right direction of what they need to do. So I'm kind of throwing that out there as a thought I have, but love to get your thoughts on that.
That's an interesting perspective. Before I jump into that one, I want to hit one piece that you had just talked about there, and that was in regards to story. You said that you feel like most people are struggling with telling their own story. I would actually push back on that because I don't think that that's what the real problem is. I think plenty of people are used to telling their own story because we all run off an internal narrative. So we're constantly telling a story in our heads. I think the problem is that we are not plugged in and concerned. Like, we realize this in sales, especially in in-home sales, when you're going into somebody else's house, like it's their intimate space. The thing is like you have to drop everything that you have going on, and now they're the focus. They're the star of the store of the show. It is the story that they have going on. What is your client's story? And if we
Yeah.
can get them, we can get into what's their story. Because if their story, like, here's the difference between a sale. Like, you can't make anybody do anything, right? Like, either you're going to do something or you're not going to do something. The only thing I
Right.
can do is provide somebody with enough information and feedback to where they have a better understanding of whether or not it makes sense for them to do something or to not do something. That's it. That's all sales really is.
Yeah.
So if at the end of me leaving that house, if they have a narrative and in their narrative, they're telling this story of I made this purchase, or hey, they're going to come and do this next upgrade a year after this. It used to be it was part of our sales and training process where we would set an agreement for the following year. Here's what we're going to do for you the following year. Because if the homeowner makes the agreement that, oh yeah, we're going to do that thing the following year, they've already made the purchase.
Right.
They've already told themselves the narrative, right? If
Right.
obviously I have to make the purchase, otherwise I can't do this thing with you next year that we said that we're going to do. And so I would push back that the issue is not so much that people's narratives, the story, they're saying, hey, my story's not landing because they're thinking about their story from themselves and they're not thinking about the story that their audience is telling themselves. And if they thought about it from that standpoint, most of them would actually sit back and be like, actually, this is a really boring story. Like, I wouldn't go pay to see that movie. I wouldn't pay to read that book. You know,
Yeah.
if you just stepped outside yourself and you're like, no, I understand why you guys didn't buy that. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say that the focus is. And this is where I spend most of my time is like, hey, what is the client journey? They're like, huh? Well, they're going to buy it because it's great. And it's like, no, like they have more complicated things going on than that. You're trying to figure out why your marketing or your message isn't working. You realize they probably saw it on their phone. Even if it was an amazing message, maybe they're 15 minutes late. Maybe they only had 2 minutes to scroll through that and they had something else to do. Like, we don't do enough of thinking about like this is a person going through life and like what are the
Yeah.
things that are competing for their attention and their resources. So I would say that's
100%.
the first thing. To the second part of what you're saying, as far as people making changes when we're talking about things like diabetes, or we're talking about like adding seatbelts, et cetera. Those are actually kind of two different scenarios, but I always go down to core factors. So like my background in education's in psychology, so cognitive psychology, behavior psychology, and also neuroscience, right? Fundamental, we all move towards what we believe will give us the most opportunity, and we move away from what we believe will cause us the most pain. That is all movement.
Yeah.
The key aspect of that is belief. So you're talking about diabetes. Hey, I know I need to do this, right? But you got to look at what the belief wiring of that is. If I have to make a change to get to that opportunity, but I believe that that change is going to cause me more pain, or I'm going to lose something because of that change that I made,
Right.
then I'll keep doing the thing. Maybe that means I believe something like I might lose my friends, or some aspect of my life could be attached to me being this person. Maybe I have a support system around me that's how our relationship works. Like they're there to coach and encourage me. And so like, hey, like you never really know what's going on in somebody else's space. But again, it comes down to that belief. And if I believe that I'm giving up something that's greater than the opportunity that you're offering me, I'm not going to change.
Right. No, I mean, I think that that's totally true. I mean, people make decisions like, they're going to gain something, they're going to lose. They're like really fundamental. Like you're going to gain something, you're going to lose something. It's interesting to kind of tie it back into the stories we like sell or tell ourselves too, though, because we can sell ourselves a story of, I'm going to, gain something or lose something that's not true, right? Like that, people can deceive themselves. But I do think your point about we need to be really understanding what whether it's the consumer or a business, the things that they're going through in this storytelling. Like I think about things from the standpoint of like climate innovators and climate companies who are trying to bring something to market, or they're putting something out that's a solution and they're trying to drive business, or they're trying to interest investors, is that very often they're thinking about things from the standpoint of, God, I've been working on this for the last 9 years. Let me tell you for the thousandth time this thing I've been working on. And it's like, nobody cares. Or let me tell you what I did 2 years ago when I was really famous. Now I'm like a nobody, but I used to be awesome. And at the time, like nobody really cares about that. What they care is, to the point you just made, is like, what's the opportunity gain? What am I going to lose out on if I don't, go? What's going to be my reality? And so I think the story sort of weaves itself through there too. Is like you do have to be in the mind of people who you're speaking to, and that doesn't. I think it's a challenge. It just doesn't. happen as much, and we have to get better at it. Maybe everybody should take a psychology class and you know understand
Well,
the
your point, it is a huge challenge because yeah, I mean, there's the concept of like what got you here won't get you there. So we talked about, for instance, startups. If I'm a startup founder and I just went and I raised all this funding from VCs or a grant, right? There was a narrative that I told that got me that money. That's what I'm now tying my success to. Here's the
right.
challenge. That first plan that got you the award, take that plan out into the market. And it's like Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they jump in the ring and get hit in the face. It's like all of
Right.
a sudden that plan needs to change. How quick are you able to change that? Because that narrative that worked for the VC or for the grant award might not be the narrative that works for you when you go into the market. And so now you might need to cultivate an entirely new narrative. And matter of fact, this is what we're seeing from a lot of the startups who got initial raises when the IRA first came out. Now they're coming in and it's been 24 months and they're saying, shoot, we've got to go do our next round of raising. That narrative that we had 24 months ago is not going to get us our next round. And as a matter of fact, the narrative that I told them there, we're not even getting the revenue or we're not even hitting where our forecasts were when we said that we were going to go out to the market with this idea. Why? Because our narrative didn't match what the market was looking for.
Right.
And so this aspect it's really deep because when you start thinking about this idea of narrative, now that transfers into what are your sales calls like? If you
Yeah.
are falling behind on the numbers, what are you thinking when you go into that sales call? Are you thinking I'm going to understand intimately this individual's life and their problems and how I'm going to solve it? And if I even could solve it, am I the one to solve it? Should I be sending them off somewhere else? Or are you thinking, wow, we're already so far behind on numbers. All right, we've got 10 leads this week. All right, I need to close at least 8. If I could get 8, and if we could get that average contract value up, we could get back on track. And is that what we're going in with? Because a lot of times people won't admit that up front, but they are. Or are they thinking, shoot, maybe even forget the company. I've got to get my own commissions back up right. I got to get my bonus right. Hey, we're planning on going on vacation. It's summertime. We're going on vacation. I'm supposed to take my wife on vacation. Those are the things when we start getting into those narrative aspects that can start to throw us off. And 1 degree off on the course and heading over a certain amount of time matters. The
Yeah.
last piece that I'll hit on that, since we were talking about the psychology and going back to that point of we move towards opportunities, we move away from pain. A lot of times people naturally go to the logic aspect of what an opportunity is. But if you go back to the example that I used, I actually used an emotional connection. Maybe it's the relationship that I had, the diabetes and do the treatment. Maybe it's
Yeah.
actually the relationship that I have with the family. It has nothing to do with my own attainment. It just has to do with the fact that they're in a position where they help me with this particular thing, or they coach and guide me because of that thing. And I want to protect that aspect of it. A lot of times, the things that move people are not the obvious. Speaking of going into homes, it's not the obvious saving money, increase your equity value, get this tax credit or incentive. It's smaller things. It is sitting there and you have mold and mildew and you're staring at your wife and you've got a 3-year-old child and you're thinking, I just need to keep my family safe.
Right.
However much this is, I'm going to make that investment. So I would challenge that it does tend to get down deeper to that emotional level.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we, make decisions based on emotion. We're basically just walking around bags of emotion and we justify it with our logic. I took a neurosequencing course that was really interesting. And this guy made this point of like, there's think, feel, act, right? And he's actually like, the way that we human beings are actually is that we act, then we feel, then we think about it, right? And so that's actually the neurosequences. We're mainly automatic. How we're responding and then we're having emotions about things. So certainly, I agree. And it's not like it's interesting, like solar or electric vehicles or decisions people make and putting a new oven or whatever the case may be. How much impact does, hey, my neighbor did it, have on them? Hey, my neighbor did it, I'm going to do it. Somebody has that, I want to have that. It's like the FOMO, or wonder what they're experiencing, I want to experience the same thing. So it's like the more that happens. But I wonder if you can give your insights also into just AI. And I wanted to frame up kind of the question this way. I was talking with this woman from the UK who's has a lot of responsibilities working with the UK, like on development and climate and AI and different things. She sits on drawing a blank on it, but I'll fill it in later. But she was making this point. She's a like somebody important in the UK, but she was making this point that like all this funding has kind of shifted away recently from climate innovation, and then it's been gone into AI. And she said the irony is that AI is actually using a lot of energy as with data centers and other things. So it's an interesting problem because AI can be a very powerful tool, and it is at the same time, at least the thought is it's going to, cause a lot of energy, usage in data centers. Maybe you have a different opinion on that, or an opinion on it. But I wanted to get your thoughts on sort of the relationship between AI, adoption of climate. How can we use it? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, how do you view it? Like, what's your take?
That's a big question. That's a big question. I feel like that's jumping back almost into the nuance of all the psychology there. But let me take a stab at this. First, let's talk about the impacts of the market, and particularly what we're seeing in regards to energy, because I think that this has changed things in a way that people aren't quite grasping yet, and that is the equation has radically shifted when we think about economy, because now it's power equals like energy equals compute equals intelligence, and intelligence for most of human civilization is always equal power. And so now we have this new flywheel where there's never going to be an hour. This is now a new paradigm shift where we are always going to be chasing more and more power. Jevons paradox: the more efficient that something becomes, the more of it that we want, the more of it that we chase after. So I think that that's going to be a really interesting avenue moving forward, because now there is no real battle between fossil fuel assets or renewable. It's just what's the most efficient, best performing, most reliable in order to be able to get me access to this compute. That now I think makes the aspect of energy independence and owning your own energy assets the safest investment that any human being could possibly make right now. There's just, in perpetuity, there's no way that is not going to pay for itself, because every single one of those watts translates over to a bit of computation, and that computation is and will be valuable to somebody, whether that's out at the edge in devices with AI on our phones, whether that is your Googles and your Amazons running large data centers for the rest of us. That is going to be a central piece of economy moving forward. So the energy aspect, I think, is something that should be thought about much deeper than where we are right now. When we're talking about implementing AI inside of businesses, what I find first is that most leaders just are not thinking about the capabilities of the technology properly. They just don't even understand like the general framework. And it actually even bears out in the numbers. There's some pretty recent numbers that came out that companies that reduced their headcount after adopting AI are now all going back and doing hiring because they overdid it. Why?
Yeah.
Because they thought they had this thing that was intelligent that could do
Right.
anything. Like, well, the reality, the base layer of what it is that these LLMs are doing is that they're taking unstructured data and they're making structured data out of it. From that structured data, you can pull insights. That's actually just the most critical thing to understand. That is essentially what's happening at the base layer, which also means people are still pretty important for that, right? Because
Right.
what information do I want to have it organized? What insights am I going to pull out of it? Which, relating back in, that's why they're hiring people back now. Shoot, we actually need people to use these systems in order to make it valuable to us. What I find is interesting is that they're not going back out in the market to rehire employees. Who they're hiring are actually contractors. Why? Because contractors, on average, like 63, 64% of contractors use AI every single week. Whereas we still have almost 50% of employees who are saying, I need training so that I can figure out how to use this system. So I think that's really interesting, because we're moving into a space now where AI is commoditizing intelligence for the cost of compute. And that's radical, because we separate ourselves based on who knows what and who doesn't know what. Especially like if you're talking about like the consultant space, right? I get to charge more based on what I know that you don't know, right? And
Right.
now we're entering into a space where that's going to be basically a level playing field. And so that's going to change the way it is that we interact, the way that it is that we go about work. What I think is going to be really cool about that is that we're going to see organizations and businesses change from being highly verticalized into being more horizontal, where you're actually there. You want to empower kind of cells or groups or teams within your company to now act as entrepreneurs and direct these systems. Because the next layer of this is agents. Right now, we can interact with a chat bot and pull some information out, organize some information, automate some tasks. But the next is going to be turning that into action with AI agents and actually doing things. And so at that point, if you can commoditize the doing and the intelligence, what creatively can you think to do with that? And that's kind of the big piece that I think is missing when we see that 50% of the numbers say, hey, we need training with these systems, and workers feel like they don't know how to use them. I understand that because as someone who will have Claude and Gemini and Copilot open in 3 windows all in a day and bounce between, two premium paid versions, it's like playing an instrument. It's not plug and play.
Yeah.
You gotta work with it in order to be able to really maximize it.
Well, you were making the point to me in an earlier discussion also that people don't know how to leverage the data intelligence so that you can companies can get a bunch of information, but then they're not actually, and I don't actually think this is a new problem per se. I mean, companies buy reports and companies that have budget, but how deeply do those, companies will hire people to come in and do disc profile for their whole teams. And then they do like a weekend training and nobody remembers what the disc, maybe they remember their own, but it's never leveraged, right? But because you were also making the point that companies that leverage these tools are basically going to leave those that don't in the dust, and those that are like master and leverage these new tools will survive, and those that don't, it's like not going to be even a playing field. And I wonder if you could just talk about that. Like, how do you see that, and the challenges of companies that have struggled already with, they got a bunch of data. What do we do with all this data? Like, how are we leveraging it? Now you have, limitless insights. So what do you do?
Yeah, well, I think that's to the point that we were just talking about, right? Where what do these systems do? Unstructured data to structured data. So what data are you feeding it? And what insight do you want to get back out from that data? And that's kind of the first piece that before you start getting into automating tasks and everything else, the best thing that you could possibly do is get insight on your own business. I think as someone who's had an opportunity to have a lot of conversations with leadership about leveraging data intelligence, it reminds me of that kind of saying that people have, like, the further up that you get in an organization, the more that you realize people have no idea what they're doing and they're just doing their best.
Yeah.
Because that's like it shows when it's like, hey, why are you doing the thing that you're doing? Because it worked yesterday and we made $1 off of it.
Yeah.
Is that the most effective thing that you could be doing? I don't know anything else. And they don't even know to explore anything else. I use the example of this for my own self. Speaking from the standpoint of being a contractor and going out into the market. In 2016, if you would have said, Jamie, tell me what your ideal customer is for a residential retrofit, I would have told you something like a home built in the 1990s, a utility bill that's at least $150, maybe like a 1,500 square foot house, 1 or 2 stories. I would have told you like obvious demographics, right? I can tell you after the fact that after running our client list through AI systems and market data and market analysis, comparing our customers against all 330 million consumers in the US, the number one differentiator marker for who our customer was?
What's that?
Their age.
Oh,
Their age.
yeah.
What bank card they used.
Wow.
What their hobbies were. There's
Yeah.
no way for me to know that. There's absolutely no way for me to know that. But there is a way for AI to do that, to know that by going through and figuring out all of these 400, 500,000 plus data points. You and I can't sit and look at that sheet and try and figure out what the
Right.
pattern is between that much data, but AI can.
Yeah.
I have a friend that I did a data project for him, analysis. And I mean, and this is literally every single layer of business can benefit from this. Our friend who's a neurophysiologist, he does sports performance training. I asked him who his ideal client was. You know, he would give me this, oh, sports athletes, etc. Here's the thing, back to narrative. He was just telling me who it was that he most enjoyed working with. That wasn't who was actually spending money with him. I go through and
Yeah.
do the analysis, and it's like, hey, by the way, you do realize that everybody that you're working is mid or senior level executives. They're all making 500 plus $1,000 a year. Like, here's the hobby as an interest. You could actually just reorient your message around that and probably
Yeah.
have way more success. Gave him a whole McKinsey style report. In a month, he changed that, and now he's immediately seeing results in his business. I'll give one more example because you and I talked about this, and that is, let's say you and I were working together, and someone was like, "Hey, all right, like I want to win more business because I really like working with Kevin, right?" And so, all right, well, tell me about Kevin so we can find you more Kevins. And like, I'm going to give you my perspective of what it's like to work with you, but that map that I'm making, that profile that I'm giving of who you are, might not align with the signals in the market that let me find more people that are like working with Kevin. And so I
Mm.
could be basically giving an order here, or giving a direction that is completely misaligned with my ability to actually find you. And using AI for market intelligence allows for us to kind of close that gap, and basically just it's removing the filter or the curtain. You get to see behind the curtain. It's like knowing the answer before you take the test.
Yeah. No, it's interesting and scary in a way, but the thought that look, like we're all on LinkedIn, we're posting, we're on social media, and our personalities and behaviors are just they're all out there, right? So now you have like literally within seconds, we have, the ability to go like, all right, we've just summed you up. Like this is kind of what you're like, and this is what, if we're going to speak to you, this is kind of how we have to speak to you. This is how we're going to make you feel all excited, or we're going to come at you with data. We're going to come at you with like really super high level. We're going to come at you with, you know, just singing your praises, or, whatever the thing is that's going to get you, you're going to open up like a flower and, start talking with us. And it's interesting and scary because that is like the head is a closed thing, like in the past, right? Like you can't see what's going on in here, but now we can actually see, and it's going to continue, like that's the direction of it. And so these tools can also be used to um, certainly help companies understand, and others, how to talk to people, and understand, like this is a bit of a segue, but I don't know if you read that, like Moxion, the uh, battery transported mobile battery company, is big. They had like a series
Yeah.
B,
Okay.
$100 million, right? And they went bankrupt.
Mhm.
And in the little story that I read, it was like product market fit. And they basically made a bunch of assumptions talking with Sunbelt, who they put a lot of confidence in. And there's nobody did anything wrong in a certain sense, right? Like it's all understandable. But they didn't have to go bankrupt. The tools actually exist for them to understand better product market fit. They didn't have to take a bunch of Series B money and then it go down the drain because they didn't make a bi-directional, battery or whatever it was, right? Um, and so it's interesting. I just think how critical it is for companies now to leverage, these insights. I mean, it's just foolish not to, and especially when you get on large scale. But even companies starting out, they have to build it in to the DNA of their company, like leveraging these tools and insights. But
Yeah, I think an interesting part of it is like there's a certain aspect of like, one, people would be alarmed to find out how much data is available about them on the internet for purchase. It's wild. On one hand, I think that there's like this, we don't want to use AI systems, and like, oh my God, this is pulling almost too much information. But on the other hand, now I've started to look at it and I'm like, think about how much bad communication and inefficient communication we get on a regular basis.
yeah,
Like I just passed off a referral connection to someone, and I happen to still be tagged in the email. And like this is a straight referral, like I'm offering a free service. And like I saw the email and it came in like this big block and it looked like this sales text and the person never responded. And I was just like, that was a miss. And
Yeah.
the person
Yeah.
expressed it, yes, we would love to. This is exactly the type of partnership connection that we look for. And then that email, and I looked at it, I'm like, that's too much. And it just, and
Yep.
they never got back on the call again. And so like you think about how many opportunities are being missed because of poor communication. Because again, we're in our own head and our own narrative. Choose on our own narrative right now. I want to make
Yep.
sure I cover all the bases. Da, da, da. All right. Yeah, like it's almost like that mess that say that they have like, sorry, I didn't have enough time to write you a short message. Yeah. So
Yeah.
knowing what that line is, I think there's an opportunity to get so much better at it and get so much more purpose driven and aligned so that we're not just out there throwing out offers because we need to convert more business or we need to make our forecast accurate, but because this is the person that I actually believe that I can help, and here's exactly how I believe I can help you. Let's have a discussion to see if that's true or not.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, when we start talking about like and I want to get your insight on this too, because I know that you similarly get to talk to a lot of businesses about this, and I see such a huge gap, and I think it's down to this almost like people want to be innovative until it's actually time to be first. And it's like, I can't do it because I hear everybody else talking about it. But then it's almost like this wild catch 22 where people are like, oh, I want to be doing the cutting edge thing that nobody else is doing that's going to give me this crazy advantage. Oh, no one's doing it. Okay, I'm going to wait. And then you wait until there's 5 other competitors in there in the space. And then that same exact person is now discouraged because they're like, oh, 5 other people are doing it
Yeah.
now. And so it's like there's all this like really interesting paradox that I feel like goes in with this, with the data aspect. People are so comfortable with the fact that the core beliefs they have about their business and why they're doing certain things, they believe that because that's what made me successful yesterday. Is that what will make you the most successful? I don't know, but it made me successful yesterday, so I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah.
And so I find there's a lot of psychology that you have to work through with people when you do start to present them with data. For you, when you're talking about this with business leaders, like how is that going? Where are you seeing that? Where's that gap that they're not getting over? That this is obvious to me and you. Where's that gap for them?
Well, it's funny, like the not to get like academic, but Daniel Kahneman's book Think Fast and Slow, he makes this basic point about human brain, right? So human brain is like, mainly your thinking brain is like, that uses too much energy. Kick that down to like the automated brain, right? And so your thinking and contemplative brain is always looking to offload work naturally because it uses energy and it wants to conserve energy. That's the way we work, right? So anything that we ever have to do that's new, the procrastination window comes in, right? And you're like, because I don't know. I've never seen that. I don't know what that feels like, right? Unless you're like jumping out of an airplane and you're like, I'm just got to make the jump. And, that's easy. You just jump. But if you're trying to figure out a new system or you're trying to implement something and it's all these unknowns. And so then your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex gets exhausted and it's like it wants to knee jerk back to like, well, let's do kind of what I've done. And if like I work with like we do virtual events to help companies generate business and investment, etc. So one company we and working getting some help from you, but we like had these data insights, right? Like of here's who came to this virtual event, and we could create this report. Now it costs money to create a report and do the work, so it's not like a freebie, but the resistance of like it's like I can give you a report on the people that came to your event, like their behavioral styles. What are other people like them in market? What percentages? Where are they coming from? Who's decision makers? Who's not? All this intelligence, and you can actually give this information to the salespeople that are doing the follow up and connect the right salespeople with the right people. They should. I mean, there's so many things you can do, but it's just exhausting, right? It's like exhausting for them. So somehow we have to get through the period where the implementation process and leveraging some of these tools is less exhausting and they can understand um, you know how to do it. And I think that there are ways. I mean, I think your point about at a certain point you get an agent, right? It's not just like the chat bot, but there's an agent that's kind of figuring this stuff out. And and there'll be mechanisms. But right now, it's not all figured out. It's a wild space, and there will be companies that will jump on it, that will skyrocket from it. There'll be companies that don't leverage it that will die, and because it's exhausting or change is hard. Changing a big company, it's like, it's hard. So, but I think that's part of the roadblock is it's like when Jeff Bezos, like when he made Amazon, it was like super easy for people. And I just come back to that. It's like when it's easy, and that's what like what we're trying to do, right? Is like, let's make, like you don't have to go through a bunch of data. Like you just have to open your calendar, have a meeting. Here's the people you're talking to. Let's make it easy. Like, and then oh, okay. And then I think that's the entry point for people.
It's interesting as I hear you talk about that. It's funny because at the end of the day, it's all about human beings and making decisions and how do we make decisions. And like back in my early sales days, I realized like, what is my job? My job is not to sell you. My job is to help you to make decisions. How do you make the best decision for you? And so like a lot of it was like getting them to think about their decision not only in just this exact moment, but how does this impact the future you, right? And I think it's almost the same thing we're talking about these business leaders because for instance, matter of fact, I showed you. So one of the AI companies that I work with, they have a software that allows for me to be able to see down to the household what prescriptive measures are likely to pay for themselves in that household. What's going to be the energy impact? What's going to be the carbon impact? So like I can go into a neighborhood and it color codes the house. I showed you this, right?
Oh,
Where
right, yeah.
you got
Crazy.
red house, the yellow house, the greenhouse. Okay, so if I'm a contractor and I'm paying to send marketing out into the market, who do I want to send messaging to? Who do I not want to send messaging to? Everybody that has a red house. I'm not sending marketing to everybody that has a greenhouse. If I need to have more of a response, I might consider extending it into the yellow. Let's think about that in context of competition in the market. All right, so numbers just came in over the last summer. Kudos for contractors. They saw a 14% increase in their contract value. Or sorry, a 12% increase in their contract value. Uh-oh, expenses also rise. They saw a 14% increase in customer acquisition costs. If I'm competing with somebody in the market and they're doing blanket marketing in a 50-mile radius because that's how far they're willing to drive in a day, and I'm saying, well, wait a second, I'm only going to market to these 10 households in this neighborhood, these 5 in that neighborhood, that 20 in that one. All right, I've just cut out a massive amount of waste in my company. I've de-risked the company to the point now to where there's no way for them to stay cost competitive with me.
Yeah.
That scenario is going to play out in every single business. If you can't get rid of that waste in the inefficiencies in your company by leveraging these systems, like you're going to have trouble being competitive in the future. And so like really narrowing that down to what we're talking about here, as far as like talking with leaders, when I'm speaking about it, I'm like this, let's think of what that full journey looks like. We're not here for agents today. You're not going to, take your entire company horizontal this week, this month, or this year. But the first step is we're building the infrastructure. Your first step of infrastructure should certainly be data. What insights can we get about our market? Can we get about the audience that we're serving? All right, now that we have that really awesome data and this really great report, guess what? These LLM tools are 10 times more valuable than they were because now they're putting out a super refined result when they're creating text or content in order to be able to communicate with those individuals. The next layer after that is going to be the agents and being able to get them to execute tasks on top of that. Then you're going to have swarms of agents and you're going to be able to have them work on full projects. But what's going to happen for most of the people in the market who have been sitting back and saying, I'm going to wait until I see them do it or hear about them doing it, when they do decide to jump in, they're still going to have to start that first layer of infrastructure and data.
Right. Too late.
One-on-one communication, agent, and you're going to be 12 months behind somebody else. And that 12 months is not going to be like the difference of going from desktop to mobile. we're moving 10 times faster than we were ever moving before. And that gap, if you think about it from the standpoint of market capture, if I can go and steal market share from other contractors because I just cut out 60% of my customer acquisition costs. Once I capture that market from them, they don't get that back.
Yeah. No, it's it's a crazy world, but I mean the value is there, and the value, and you have these tools, you have these resources, and it's a question of, do you jump on them and kind of get past that initial roadblocks and leverage them and get help to leverage them, but leverage them, because it's true, the map that you showed me, it's like, if I can spend, here's a neighborhood, here's 50 red houses, and I'm going to waste my time going to like all the greenhouses, all the yellow houses, and then even what you're going to say to those folks in the red house, and understanding how to speak to the market, understanding, because when you're talking, it was making me think of, part of the process for anybody is fail fast, and then be successful, right? Like, get a lot of no's and then get your yes. But we're seeing you can fail so fast now. Like, you can really get out there and fail if you use the insights. Like, you can just much more quickly, expedite the failure process to get to a success. You're still going to have to go through, hiccups in that, but it's just a different world that we live in, and we'll be living in, even, in a year from now. But I wanted to ask you if you could
I,
just say a
I
little
would
bit.
actually say though, like,
Yeah.
it's exciting. This is the most exciting time to ever be in business. We're in a space where a startup can literally compete with market incumbents because of the fact of, you and I have been in the conversations talking to those larger companies. How quick are they to try to adopt this or make any changes right now? And
Right.
they're not moving fast enough to keep up with how quickly it is that the technology is moving. I had AI write up its own case study on market intelligence using the example of two pizza shops. It was like, one was like an artisan pizza shop, best of the best. The other was super mediocre, but knew the right times to send out the right specials and offers for that audience, tailored to that day, that month, their specific things that were going on in there, like happy graduation, here's a coupon. And it mapped it out over time. And it was like, we'll be able to capture this much market share after this month, that much after that month. And it strategically broke down that it was like I think it was like after year 2 or year 3, it predicted that it was going to have captured enough market share from the competitor that they wouldn't be able to cover their operating expenses. They would go out of business, and then you would see a leap up after that. AI wrote its own case study breaking that out tactically,
Yeah.
about how it would use market intelligence in the market for a pizza shop, and a mediocre pizza shop, not the best one, a mediocre pizza shop.
Yeah. Crazy, right? But it is exciting. I agree with you. It is exciting. It's like, if you leverage the tools, it's super exciting. I was just going to ask if you,
If you're
I
a
wanted to
small
just,
guy,
what's that?
one last one here. If you are a small player, like, again, if you're coming into the market, anybody, if you've ever looked at the market, you've been like, yo, this is not fair. Like, I can't get a giant raise. I don't have those excuses are now gone. If you just go out and learn and do the work and play with the system, again, it's an instrument. If you just go out and learn how to use this instrument, there's the equalizer for you. Not even as an equalizer, you have advantage.
You know what? The word play is key. Like, it's super interesting, but if you view it as play, just go play with this stuff, learn it, like, figure it out, have fun with it. It's so exciting. It's super cool. Like, and people are, but I think, people are trying to figure out, certainly it'll become more, everywhere, all, just like Google, right? People be Googling and everything, but it is like, how do you leverage it to its maximum? And there's a lot of people trying to tell you, how to do that. So people have to get beyond just like the prompts, right? Like the prompt of, and turning that into action, right? Because anybody can ask questions and what have you. But
I think what it is the reimagining of what's actually possible. Like, take that pizza shop, for example. Like, you have an opportunity to have a completely different relationship with your customer base. Like, whoa, hey, wait, I know based on the profile, I got an alert from the AI that's monitoring my consumer list that, this family, they're celebrating their graduation this week. Hey, that's a great opportunity to send them out. Here's a free pizza. Happy graduation.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, that's a completely different level of a relationship that you have with them. And
right.
they have now a relationship with you. It's a completely different way of, like, there's so much opportunity because we can reimagine the way that we're doing certain things. And now the cost to deliver something like that used to be, it was something that companies couldn't afford. I'll put this out there as a thought point for people. Business intelligence services has been around for a long while. AI is not brand new. As a matter of fact, the services that you and I are talking about, I have gone out in the market and I have priced these out from corporate other SaaS companies that sell this. I have seen the price point anywhere from $80,000 to $250,000 to deliver this insight on audience, on market.
Yeah.
I can now get that same level of insight leveraging tools, a number of tools in AI for hundreds of dollars. Like, I can't think of a scenario where we've ever seen price destruction like that. That
Yeah, it's
something that
price destruction,
a
right?
year ago, 250, and I can get it done for a few $100s. That's a different world. We're in a different world.
It is. Well, one funny way is that because people don't know, they're going to still pay. It's just that they're going to still pay $200,000, and those companies, they're going to reduce their cost to produce that report by, hundreds. It's like when you just bring your computer to the IT guy and they just, all right, come back in a couple hours, and they just turn it off and turn it on, right? And like, oh yeah, I keep my job in the basement. And um, can you tell like a little bit about like what's the goal of Clear Clean, and what are you hoping to accomplish? Are you producing a lot of like content and have a YouTube channel and doing a lot of great interviews? But what are you hoping to accomplish with that?
Yeah, the Clear Clean really has just one guiding ethos, and that is insight for professionals by professionals. So our goal is to dive in deep on the real issues that are either, gaps or edges in the clean energy transition. So, what can we do to help our peers stop from falling off those edges or falling in those gaps? And then also, can we help align around where the opportunities are? And so the thing that we do that I get the most kick out of is that I'm able to go find exact experts that I know are working on that problem, and we have a discussion about it. I can give examples of the workforce development being a huge talking point in our industry, to the point of I kind of feel like no one really knows exactly what they're talking about anymore because everybody's using the same word to talk about different variations of a problem. So I'm like, hey, let's go get the real information here. I went to have an interview with a program manager for Emerald City Collaborative, who's on the ground floor teaching contractors, getting them out in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, her version of what's going on was completely different than everybody else. She's like, what workforce shortage? She goes, matter of fact, up here in Seattle, we have 700 electricians sitting on the sidelines. We
Oh
actually really just
wow.
imbalance. It's an imbalance. They're over here in the commercial space, but they're not about to go over to do the residential work. I'm like, wow. See, like, that's a reality work there.
Right.
Or yesterday I had the opportunity to talk to a climate scientist who literally, like, advises utilities, municipalities, and state offices how to prepare for resiliency in the events of extreme weather. So, island in the Caribbean has a hurricane roll through. All right, how do we set up the infrastructure to make sure that we're more resilient for when this happens again? And I get to geek out and ask these guys questions like,
Yeah.
hey, how are you thinking about it for this or for that? So that's largely what it is. Like, if someone wants to get a pulse for what's going on in the clean energy space from workers that are people who are actually working on the problem, we try to go out there and find those individuals and bring them in for discussion.
Yeah. I think that that's awesome. I think there's a lot of information out there, and getting people who are on the ground working on a problem. Sometimes, I mean, just like your workforce example, super insightful, right? Because my assumption is like, there's a bottleneck, there's people need to get trained. But the fact that there is actually, it's a different kind of problem. So, um, Awesome. Well, maybe we can, we can conclude
Before we
this
wrap
one.
up, I actually want to ask you a question too, just
Okay.
because I think clearly was how you and I got connected. But for Climate Hive, I'm kind of interested. Like I found Climate Hive very interesting because I see this gap as we were talking about with narratives and stories, and it just companies not navigating that gap as effectively as I feel like they could. What was kind of your guiding? What was the driver for you to say, climate needs to happen. This is a problem that's in the market that you can help people with.
Yeah, I think so. I've been in sales and marketing for 30 years, and I think there is a need to warm up a relationship. So, like, I've been successful in warming up relationships. So, if I go to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm Kevin with Climate Hive, do business with me," 9 out of 10, or like 99 out of 0.9% of the times, they're going to be like, you know what, I'm really busy right now, right? But if you go to somebody and you're like, you should talk to Kevin. He solved some problems for some other companies. I think he would be really good to have a conversation with. That like kind of referral thing has a lot of impact on people. They're like trust, and they want to come and hear the story. So this sort of relationship marketing, right? So from there, it was like, okay, these companies have something to say, but they're talking about themselves. They're not talking about precisely what we talked about in the beginning of the conversation. They're not talking about what's in the minds of the investor or the business that they're talking to. What's their emotional, what are they going through? They're talking about, we do this, and this is interesting to us, and that's not interesting. So it was kind of bringing together, like, okay, we can go and we have the language and the tools to bring people to a conversation, which is a virtual event, and that we can coach our clients on how do you really create a story and ask questions during your virtual event, so that you're engaging people and people feel like they're engaged and they walk away with a little bit of thought leadership and like a little bit more interest. And then most critically is the follow-up piece. So we see like companies, there's expos and conventions all over the place for clean tech, and you see people walk around with their suits and their business cards, a company with big displays, and they're spending like tens and tens of thousands of dollars, right? And then person gets back to the office and they got like, I got it right here, like, you got a handful of cards, you're going to put all this stuff in, and it's just a waste. It's a waste to get, because all you really want to do is you want to, as quickly as possible, get to a warm conversation. So what our assumption, and we're testing right now still a little bit, I think, but our assumption is if we can circumvent that and shorten the cycle and bring the right people into the right room together where action happens on climate, and we can make it more efficient, then that's a real big contribution to those climate companies moving forward faster. And we've had some early successes with virtual events we've done. We've learned from companies where they're like, I don't think virtual events will make me any money. We tried to, and it's like, yeah, like, because it was boring, like, likely, and over it, right? Like it does have to do with your storytelling and how you're engaging and what you're leveraging. So even including if you're not leveraging AI tools within your virtual event and who's coming, and do it right. So that's what our goal is, to leverage sort of an ecosystem, and not to put people who are BDRs, business development reps, out of business, but just to really shorten the cycle and help leverage what's there in front of us to move things faster for climate innovators, whether they're startups or whether they're more advanced companies, even if they're accelerators. So that's the goal.
I think that what you said, like, it just strikes such a chord for me. I heard not too long ago somebody said, first time founders think about product, second time founders think about brand and distribution. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, you know what? That's actually a lot of the conversations that I'm having with these startups, where I'm like, how are you planning on getting your ideas out to market? And so that's why I think Climate Hive makes so much sense to me, because I see you guys helping to solve that gap for distribution and for brand, and that storytelling and getting that out there. And then there's an aspect of what you're doing as well that allows for companies to get a deeper level of insight and intelligence about what they're doing. And I almost wonder, I don't know if you've thought about this or how much you guys are working on this, but it seems like you're in a really great place to almost be that kind of buffer, incubator, early exposure to starting to use some of these AI systems to be able to start feeding that information in. not so that we're taking away from BDRs, but so that you can actually make them more effective, more efficient in what they're doing. Because here's the insight of an event. Here's what they responded to. Here's what they were interested in. Seems like
Yeah.
you're in a space to fill that gap.
Well, we'd like to do that. We'd like to get to a place where literally people can open their calendar and then here's the insights of the people that you're having a meeting with and you're having the meeting, right? And now you understand the story and you understand how to tell the story. And it's not like, you're opening your Excel spreadsheet or even, some CRM and you're right. And I've done that. I made 10,000, 25,000 cold calls. I mean, I've done all that. But there's an easier, more efficient way to do the things. And so we don't even expect that companies have to pick up and understand all kinds of data insights on who came. Those are helpful, but at the end of the day, it's like, let us serve up the warm conversation, the warm relationship. Bring them to the party. They love your party. Now you got a new friend. Now all you got to do is send them a thank you card, follow up with them. Here's what they liked about your party.
It's an interesting spot that you have a real opportunity to capitalize there. And this is why there's this like no-brainer sense. For anybody that has, founder, executive, C-suite in their title, they are used to being bombarded with cold outreach messages and emails all of the time. And it's like, the strategy and the tactics are the same. I looked up some surface level information about you on LinkedIn, or I read about your company new press release, or there's some, whatever the general, and then I customized the message in the first sentence and a half to 2 sentences is me acting like I really know you when I don't. And by the way, now I'm into my pitch. You have an opportunity to get that conversation rolling in a completely different way that is actually authentic, because it's driven to the fact that you went to this event for this information. We're reaching out because you're this person. This is the way you want to be. Like it just seems like there's a great opportunity there for at least me thinking about it on the outside as someone who gets a lot of cold outbound messages. And I'm like, this sucks, this is bad, that's not, or
Right.
passes off messages. And I'm like, wow, that sounds like a sales pitch when it really didn't need to be. It seems like you guys are in a space where it's like, you can improve that experience so much, not only for the result the customer get, but the people who you're actually doing the outreach to for us to actually enjoy that engagement a little bit more.
100%. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with a CEO company, and it was based on outreach on LinkedIn, and it was cold outreach. And then he was like, "Well, how do I know this works?" I'm like, "Well, like you're on a conversation with me right now. What do you mean? Like you're actually having?" Because I won't like give all the words away. People can do their own research and find the magic words. But if you understand human psychology, there are things you can say to people, and it's not. I hope this email finds you well. That's not going to ever work, right? Like there are things that you can say to people that, and one thing I will say is if you show up anywhere with a give versus like a take or an ask, if you show up for the first time with a give, like it's so much better. Like and show up with a let's have a conversation. But you do have to understand, like you say, like, and you have an opportunity to understand what the psychology is, what is the like need of that decision maker, and maybe they have to act fast and cut to the chase sometimes, but
I think I've noticed a lot of companies, I think a lot of companies have picked up on that what Gary Vee calls the jab hook, right? Or it's like give all right, now do your ask, right?
Yeah.
I almost think that like we're even past that now.
Awesome.
I think that if people just approached it this way, let me make my outreach not suck for the other person.
Yeah.
Like if that was the bare minimum of what someone accomplished, like they would convert 10 times better than they do. Hey, you're gonna come to my webinar. Let me make sure that my webinar doesn't suck for you. I just sat on a webinar today and I'm sitting here and I'm like, it's 20 minutes in and they're still doing intros and they haven't even gotten to the aspect of the webinar that I jumped on for. And I'm thinking about this. I'm like, this is just so disrespectful to the professionals that you have on this webinar in the middle of the day. Like, get to the point. I don't care. I'll find your background out afterward, or if I want to, I can find it out before. Let's dive in and make this worth value for the people that are actually attending. Outreach messages, it's like, this is clearly just some automated template message. Like, I've got other things to do than to pay attention. Like make it not suck for the other person. And I feel like everybody would so much further.
I'll end. I opened one of the last emails I opened. There was like a cold outreach email to me about like I can generate leads for you. Um, the subject line, I don't know how they did this, but the subject line was upside down. So like it was like, we want to talk to you about, blah blah blah. And I don't even remember what it says, but it was upside down. I'm like, how did you do that? Like I'm like, okay, that got pattern interrupt, like that got my attention. Like,
Yeah.
how did you make an upside down thing? So I think yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to be creative for sure. And you do have to like there's no excuse not to be like creative and interesting. It should be fun. Like it should be, yeah.
And I think be valuable. Like I think about this, well, back
Yeah,
to like people are like, oh, I have to give now. I think most people are pretty conditioned, like, oh, I have to give something. But I think that the thing is that they end up giving something that has no value. And I'm
true.
like, if you have a human being's attention, just try to deliver value, right?
Yeah,
Like, don't just give them a McDonald's toy to say that there was a toy in the Happy Meal. And by the way, now I've just got junk that I've got to throw away later. Like, yo,
right.
share some insight. Like, I try to do this where it's like if I'm doing an outreach to somebody, I'm going to try to give them insight about their market back to data intelligence. I'm going to try to give you insight about your market that you probably don't already know. Just two things. One, I'm just helping you out. So also you can take it or leave it. Like I'm unchanged either way,
Yeah,
right? But also it's for you to demonstrate your value, right? Like, oh wow, this person has insight that I don't have access to. I
right.
might want more of that. And it's just such a better way. I think, at the end of the day, for as much as we could say technology and innovation and AI and all these catchword terms, I think it's really just about improving the quality of the relationship with people and the connection and the communication with people. And if we can improve that quality, like it's going to be, you're hard pressed to lose in perpetuity with that strategy and focus.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's totally on point. One other thing that I do is I'll show up and my promise, like when I first got into like, on the climate space, my promise was I'm going to share whoever's in my network. So as I grew in my network, I would always make sure if I can make a connection for you, I might not be your connection right now, but who do you want to meet? Like who do I know that you need to know? And then let me go do the work to make the introduction for you. And I'll do that. Like I've done that probably almost 1,000 times. And I like doing that. There's no money in it, but it doesn't matter. Like that's a value add. Like that's a give. Like, because I know it's like I introduced my dad's wife to her best friend just on like acts. I just ended up having to know two people I thought would be interesting. And they're best friends now. It's like the most amazing thing. Like you always have that they're always gonna think about you, right? Like who introduced you guys? Oh, so I love doing that, but I think that's also a value add. It's like, oh, you know what? I know a recruiter that you really need to talk to, or you know, here's somebody that's going to be, the perfect person.
I do it
So
similar, but like, so matter of fact, back to the clear clean and how that even ended up coming into existence is like I spent a decade plus working in startups. So like I was out in the field, right? And so then kind of as IRA was coming through, then I had questions or thoughts about how the market was. Like all of a sudden I look back and I was like, oh shoot, I have no network or audience, right? So I was like, I guess I better get out here and start sharing and engaging with people. And actually, that's where the premise of the clear clean came from is let's go find experts who are so busy doing the work that they aren't building an audience, and let's bring them here and give them an audience. But one of the things that I found, giving out my time kind of freely to build relationships throughout the industry, is that I would speak with these startup founders, and kind of my thought process, similar to how you were talking about who can I connect with in my network. My thought process was, well, let me understand your problem from your perspective. And once I'm now on the same side of the table looking at it from your perspective, now what I'll do is I'll give you my insight as from my 10 plus years of experience in doing the thing, because maybe my insight based on my experience looks different or sounds different than what you're thinking about. And what ended up happening is like I would give out all this information, and people were like, "Oh my god, I feel like I should have paid you." Like, I don't even, I can't even pay for that, like, et cetera. And it would build the goodwill in that relationship. And I mean, and that's paid off, tenfold in relationships, connections, and et cetera afterward. But here's the other thing that happened with that is that because I was doing that, now all of a sudden, every single one of those businesses, I now assimilated that perspective. And so now every time I went
yeah,
to go talk to the next one, now I know how this business is looking at the market. I know how this NGO is looking at the market. I know where they see the problems at. I know where they see the opportunities at. I know where they see the edges and gaps. It's actually one of the coolest aspects about the discussions that we do for the Clear Clean, because these are like real, like in the moment discussions. I'll ask business leaders, all right, what does your strategy map look like for this upcoming year? And they'll break down in real time. Here's how we're looking at the market. Here's where we see the opportunities at. And it's such a better quality experience that actually enriches everybody, even if we don't immediately transact with an agreement.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, maybe we should conclude with that, and yeah, look forward to more.
This is dope. Yeah, we're gonna have you come on the Clear Clean and get you on there as well, so you can share some of your insight, because I definitely think our audience would appreciate hearing that.